Squatting and deadlifting. We're told that we ought to do it. They're the cornerstones for what makes a great and strong program and building an overall phenomenal physique. But when you go to perform them, you have very hard pain in your lower back and in your knees, and you're just being told, or you believe, that it's because of those movements that you hurt. Well, today we're going to go over what exactly might be causing this issue or issues and how it could all be resolved by addressing one deficiency from your daily life. Let's dive into it. What's going on, y'all? Welcome to the Gym Survival Guide, where we talk all things gym and fitness related. I'm your host, David, and on today's episode, we're going to be talking about hip mobility. That's right. By the time you're done with this episode, you're going to be hip to what might be causing your lower back pain and knee pain. I know I'm corny. I'm like an ear of corn. I'm just full of it. Just kidding. But on the serious note, I am a personal trainer, not a physical therapist or licensed medical professional. So if you are experiencing chronic pain in these areas and you feel it necessary, please do go seek out medical attention and don't just rely on some guy on YouTube. That being said, if you want to stick around and hear my 2 cents about what I've seen cause these issues in my clients as well as some issues I've had in the past, I'm here to dish it out. Now, before we go any further, I would like to have us an equal footing on what it means for mobility. Now, when people think about the ability to move your body through space in a odd fashion, they think of flexibility. And they think that this is a really good thing to be had. But truthfully, hyperflexibility is a terrible thing to be had. Flexibility is more or less your body's ability to be manipulated through space by external sources. Let me show you. So, my hand, my fingers, my fingers have a limited range of motion. So going inward, they articulate just fine, right? Actually, it's surprising I have this kind of coordination. But when going the opposite direction, there's a limited range of motion or mobility. So as you can see, my middle finger can only go so far back. But if I apply external force upon it, manipulating it, look at all that extra range that it can go through. This is flexibility. This, in my opinion, is not what we want. What we want is mobility, which is your ability to manipulate your body or joints through a range of motion under your own strength and control. So it does not need outside external manipulation, but rather you can control the range of motion within your own capabilities. That is the difference. So with that understanding, hip mobility is your body's ability to move your hips in a controlled fashion in a safe manner by utilizing your own musculature to move the joints. So with this, now we start running into what we're understanding of what it means to have hip mobility, but also poor hip mobility. So if mobility is the ability to control and move, immobility or poor hip mobility is weak muscles that aren't able to move the socket in the way that we desire. So what happens when we have poor hip mobility? You will notice that when you go to do a squat or a deadlift, your knees will cave in a fashion towards one another, almost looking like you have to hold your wee and really go find a bathroom. This is called knee valgus. So what happens when we have knee valgus? So knee valgus causes your hips to not externally rotate or abduct, but rather cause your knees to travel inward, and all load that would normally be transferred to the glutes and to your hips are now being pushed upon the inside of your knee. And that's where you'll start feeling tension on the inner part of your knee. That tendon that's there is unfortunately taking the brunt of the force that your hip to your glutes should be taking. So long term, this is what's going to cause either a slight tear to a ripping of that tendon on the inside of your knee, which we absolutely do not want. And on top of that, you aren't able to properly engage the muscles that we want to engage in the squat and deadlift. The whole purpose of us working out is to develop the musculature to make us resilient through life and bring vitality to us throughout our years on this planet. So that way we can be as lively and effective and jubilant with ourselves and with the world around us. Again, our bodies are our way to not only navigate through space, but interact with it. And if we have parts of our body that are so incapable of withstanding force, our ability to interact and engage and thrive diminishes that much more. So, what do we do to be able to relieve hip immobility? Well, the good news is the exercises that we would utilize are not only easy, they don't provide a total taxing effect on your central nervous system, which means you can do it fairly frequently and recover easily, but they can be done in your home. So you don't necessarily have to go to the gym to do this. If you want to be at home and do this, it's just fine. You can do it. There might be a couple things that you may not be able to do unless you are willing to invest a little bit more. But for the most part, the things that I would really like drive home, you can do by yourself in the privacy of your home and as frequently throughout the day if you wanted to. So first question is going to be, well, what do we do? Okay, so you're going to get, and for a lot of these movements, you only need 2 pieces of equipment. The third might be necessary if you're doing it at home and you don't have a surface that you can do this on, but we'll go into that just a little bit later. So you're going to need what's called a hip circle. Now, what is a hip circle? It is a cloth band that you put around your thigh, and we use it to push against and engage our... It's a band that we utilize to be able to add and apply resistance to our hips to be able to strengthen them. Now, what are we going to do initially? We're going to go ahead and put that hip circle just above the knee or lower thigh. And what is this going to do for us? Well, first, you're going to take a not a staggered step, but a little bit of a wide stance with your toes pointed either a 30 to 45 degree angle outward. And you are going to take a side step, not super exaggerated, but just enough to where you feel tension on the hip that is stepping outward. And you're going to lead with your heel, not with your toes. Trust me, you will feel the difference, and this will engage your hip, and you also feel a little bit of your thigh on the side engaging in this. And so what we're going to do is anywhere from 10 to 15 steps one way and 10 to 15 steps going the other way, and a total of 3 sets going both ways for the movement. Now, if you can't make it to the 10 to 15, make it to what you can. So if you can only do 5, do 5. If you can only do 8, do 8. But what I want you to pay attention to is if on one side you can do 10 to 15, but on the other side you can only do 5 to 8, that's going to be your weaker hip. And that one we're going to want to keep in mind for a movement later on down the road, okay? So from here, we're going to go ahead and get on the floor. And we're going to put our arms out at a 45 degree angle from our body. And then we're going to bring our heels in towards our butt and make it to where our heels are under our knees. From here, we are going to thrust our hips up and rest on our upper back and perform what's called a glute ham bridge. From here, you're going to go ahead and take a couple steps out and spread your knees. So what this is going to do is, again, not only engage your hips, but you're also going to find that your glutes are being engaged in this process as well. So typically when we have weak or tight hips, our glutes are typically weak as well, because it's the hips that help activate and engage your glutes. So if your hips aren't all that active, typically your glutes aren't going to be active as well, which is why we want to use movements like this to kind of get a big bang for your buck by addressing both issues. So for this one, because of the nature of what it's addressing, I would prefer my clients and anybody who's starting this off to do anywhere from 15 to 20 second holds. Now, if you can't, and with the hold, that means that you have no descent of your hip. Now, if you can't hold it for that long, again, don't worry, work up. So if you can only hold it for 8 seconds, dude, good job. Hold it for the 8 seconds, rinse and repeat for a total of 4 holds, and that will be your set. But let's work up going into it. let's work up the times that we can hold this. And this is definitely going to be a good driver for not only getting your hips going on, but also getting your glutes worked as well. Now from here, we're going to go ahead and find a bench. If you're doing this at home, if you have a surface that you feel confident in to be able to support your weight, go ahead and do it. I typically like to recommend the benches at the gym because they are designed to hold weight at excess, and I just want your safety to be kept in mind. So find a bench, and you're going to go ahead and rest your upper back on the bench with your arms spread out. This is going to give you a stable, balanced surface to be able to hold yourself on. And just like we did earlier, you're going to bring your heels to be under your knees, and you're going to drive your hips up. This is going to be a hip thrust. Now, we're not trying to overload it necessarily because, again, our hips are inactive and weak at this point. So any engagement we can get right now is going to be positive engagement and allow us to overload over time. So if you're finding that one glute is able to be activated and the other one isn't, what we're going to do is the leg on the side that is able to be activated, we're going to raise up and keep the inactive glute, or the one that's harder to engage, keep that side foot down and really drive your heels in on that foot. All right. And now this is what's called unilateral training. So if not both sides necessarily might be deficient, only one side might be, and you need to catch that side up to the other corresponding side. Now, it's not an odd thing. It's actually fairly common for a lot of people, especially in this day and age with modernity. Almost everybody and their mother has an office job or has to sit for whatever reason, anywhere from 6 to 7 hours a day at work, and then you drive home, and then you go and sit on the couch, and then you go sit at the table and eat dinner, and then you go back to the couch, and then you're in bed. Before you know it, the majority of your day you've been doing seated, which is why you're going to have weak hips or tight hips, weak glutes. So don't feel like your body is weird for having one side that is active and the other one isn't. Honestly, it's more common than you realize, and the fact that we're addressing it now, you're doing great. So in this position, if we're finding that you are both glutes are firing, but this position is a little too easy for you, what you can do is find like a dumbbell that's anywhere from let's call it 10 to 15 pounds. Rest it on your hip, and you can use that to thrust through. Okay, it's going to add a little extra resistance, and it's going to really help you fire it through. And eventually you'll work up to a barbell, and this is how you do hip thrusters. Eventually this will become a workout in itself. This particular protocol, you could think a gentleman by the name of Dr. Brett Contreras, his entire doctoral thesis was on how to develop the butt. And he popularized the hip thrust, which is what you typically see a lot of girls do at the gym who are trying to develop the entire backside. But I digress. So from here, we're going to go ahead and take the bench, bring it within distance of a squat rack, a pole, what have you. So like how I said earlier, if you find that one hip is able to fire more than the other, this is where we're going to start trying to bring up that unilateral training for the hip. So what we're going to do is the hip that is not as active, we're going to loop a resistance band around the pole or squat rack or whatever you're using, and pull this, put the long side on the side that you're training. You're going to bring your foot and rest it on the bench after having fed your foot through the hole. And what we want to see is when your knee is coming inward towards the midline of your body, there's slack in the band. But when you bring your knee to be in line with your toe, we want your hip to be fighting resistance. This is going to help bring up this lagging hip and ultimately allow you to start training it up to catch up to the other side. And these movements in general are going to be great ways to bring up your hip and glutes. But this one will really drive the imbalance to be able to have a good balance on both hips being able to fire. So by now, we should know or have observed that these movements, they're not really taxing. They don't take much time. Again, each movement in general, depending on how much time you want to take in rest in each one. Again, rest in between each set shouldn't be more than maybe 20 to 30 seconds, you're going to find that this protocol is only going to take you maybe 20, 25 minutes at most. And eventually this will just become a warm-up for you. You won't always have to do every single one of these things, and you might only have time to do one or two of these things, and that's totally fine. But I do encourage that you practice each and every one and help address these hip immobility issues to bring up your hips to be able to properly squat and deadlift. But even more importantly, when we get knee valgus addressed, you no longer have to worry about your knees hurting, not just when you're squatting and deadlifting, but like if you're going up a flight of stairs. You know, now that your hips can properly engage and take load, and so can your glutes, your knees aren't taking the brunt of the load. So you can see how this is going to bring some relief in your daily life. And before you know it, your knees can start feeling that much better, and you don't have any concern about squatting or deadlifting. Now that we're able to squat and deadlift, I do have a couple of videos for you to check out. One is how to do a squat, which I'll link up over here. And the other is going to be how to do a deadlift, which I will also link up here. And if you need a basic program to get onto for a beginner, again, video right here. That breaks it all down. And if you did find that this was a helpful video for you to address your hip immobility issues to become mobile, I do ask, talking's hard sometimes, guys. I like lifting weights. Talking is the hard thing. I do ask that you like and subscribe and comment down below if you have any questions or if you have a topic that you'd like for me to make a video of. Now, again, if you found that this was a useful video for you and you know somebody in your life that's suffering from a similar issue or might potentially suffer from this issue, please do not hesitate to send this to them. Bring them into this community. Let's make them a fellow survivalist and show them that ordinary training can lead to extraordinary results with that little bit of extra. But guys, until next time, set is yours. Peace.
Hold me close till I get out.